Hello, everybody. I'm Lucas Kendall with my co-host Charlie Vignola, and we are so excited here to be with the great director MICHAEL Lehmann, who just taught me how to pronounce his name, and I almost messed it up. But he's a director that we really admire. He did I'll read off some of the credits. This is just some, but obviously the high school classic, cult classic, great movie Heathers, Meet the Applegates, Airheads, Hudson Hawk, The Truth About Cats and Dogs, 40 Days, 40 Nights. And then in television, where you've been working more recently, goes back to the Larry Sanders Show, The Comeback, Bored to Death, American Horror Story, many episodes of True Blood, great show, Californication, Blunt Talk, and all of the episodes of a show that we all loved, The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window, which is famous in my household. All I have to do is say bingo and my wife cracks up.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I can tell, Michael, from your career, from your oeuvre, is that your projects are generally associated with what's hip, very hip. Everything from Heathers to your more recent films are extremely hip, which is cool.
Well,
what do you say to that?
Good or bad, and it's certainly not intentional.
Well, all right, but let me ask a harder question to start, because I was reading other interviews to prepare for this, and you said that you definitely feel like you have a through line to your work. And I definitely noticed a certain interest in subversive material, but how would you characterize it? Or do you not prefer to do that?
Well, I don't know if I'm capable of really doing it, but what I do think is that there are certain things that do run through my work, and one is a subversive sense of comedy, which is not necessarily the hip version of whatever that is at any time, but I do like to challenge people and challenge their point of view in a way that will also make them laugh. And so I try to do that as much as possible. I think also, for me, what's interesting is even when I go with dark comedy, and even when I go with comedy that's tends to be outrageous or has shock value in it, I like to ground my characters enough so that there is some humanity to it. Because some friends of mine will say, "Well, you're so cynical and you're so dark," and I go, "Actually, no, I'm pretty positive. I think that people are horrible, and I love it." It's and that is kind of the through line that I think is there, is that I believe in celebrating what is awful about humanity, because that's who we are, and rather than pretend as if we're better than we are, we should kind of get an ironic kick out of all the contradictions in our lives.
That's very rabbinical.
Yeah, well, that's that makes some sense.
Yeah. No, it's a very Jewish humanitarian point of view, so I appreciate it.
Well, you have to understand, my father was a German-born Freudian psychoanalyst, Jewish, of course. My mother, a pretty irreverent, rebellious Jewish woman from California. And so even though I wasn't raised religiously, I was raised certainly in that rabbinical tradition, one way or another, I suppose.
Yeah. No, you pick it up. It's cultural.
Yeah.
I picked it up. So I loved The Woman in the House, and we were just dying laughing. I'd never seen anything that was sort of a spoof, and yet it had like 20% of the jokes of an airplane or a naked gun. Those things are just constant gags. And this was more drama with occasional, just the sight gags and then we would just start cracking up. But my wife and I, we would watch an episode a night, and we're like, I'm really interested in this story. I mean, I'm really feeling for this character, which was hysterical because it was also deliberately ludicrous, but I was so into it.
Well, then you got it, which is great, because, we set out to make a comedy that didn't have any certainly didn't have very many jokes in it. And you could kind of scratch your head and say, why in the world would you do that? And my point is exactly what you said, is that when you watch this and take it seriously, you find yourself unable to take all the ludicrous elements seriously, which is an extended chuckle. It's pretty funny. I mean, to me, it's really funny. But it does require from the viewer, they have to be willing to both enjoy the genre elements and the aspects of those kind of stories that everybody enjoys, and they also have to be willing to have fun with them at the same time and recognize that these stories follow patterns for reasons, that we are conditioned to respond in certain ways to them, that we enjoy the the tropes and the patterns the same way we enjoy listening to 12 bar blues. But you know what we've got is something that is designed to be completely ludicrous by the time it's finished. So you know, some people would say to me, "Oh, I saw your show, you know, I really liked it. I only had time to watch the first episode, but I really liked it." And I said, "That's great. I'm really glad you liked it. The first episode is pretty straight." I said, you didn't get a chance to really get to where we're going." And they go, "Oh, yeah, okay, I guess I'll have to watch the whole thing sometime." And I figure, well, they'll think I made a drama, you know.
Well,
Well,
I thought
I
the
was
first
gonna-
episode was just full of like the passing out in the rain and the guy spending a year to fix the mailbox and the fact, even the subtle things like it's supposed to be New Hampshire and it's obviously Pasadena.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
think for my wife and I watched it, Michael, and it was interesting because, you know, it was originally something I thought was going to be more of an overt, you know, spoof or airplane scary movie type of show. And the fact that it was not that was so surprising, you know, that you didn't really lean into that so much, and that it actually worked as kind of a compelling, you know, series that more or less worked on the level of what you were, you know, inspired to play in that sandbox. And so like by the time you got to the end, and I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but it's it's simultaneously an end, like you're saying, that is absurd but actually kind of scary when you finally get to that reveal and how it kind of plays out. So it kind of does work simultaneously against your expectations, and deliver on the sort of the genre tropes that you sort of expect, but putting kind of an interesting twist on it.
well, I'm glad that you guys got it. And you know, a lot of people did. I would follow a little bit on social media. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but I'd follow some of the posts, and the ones that amused me most were people who said, "I've been watching this show and I've been loving it, but that last episode ruined everything for me." And I thought, well, that person clearly didn't realize it was a comedy. And that's fine, you know, if you can do that. One of our Netflix executives said, "You know, some people are going to watch this and love it and never, ever have any idea that we're making comedy here." And I said, "Is that a problem?" And she said, "No, that's fine. As long as people are watching and liking it."
It was after my heart, really, because like, you know, I'm a nerd. I spend most of my life like thinking, this is so stupid. Like everything, like TV. I mean, we're living in idiocracy, the politics. But I was thinking about this, like when I was maybe 10 or 11, we were in gym on Martha's Vineyard in West Tisbury playing basketball. I hated gym. I wasn't even terrible at sports. I still hated it. Basketball bounces and I'm chasing it as it goes out of bounds. Hits the fire alarm. Fire alarm goes off. Gym teacher right away goes, "Everybody out, okay." And like, but it hit so I spend the next 20 minutes going to every grown-up I can find. I'm like 10. I saw the basketball hit the fire alarm and they're all like, "I wonder what it is. Is this a drill?" Like, hello. So it's like, that's in here. And when I see this show and you're goofing on Flight Plan at the end, I'm like, oh my God, I love these guys. I got to meet this guy.
Well, I'm really glad you liked it. We had a great time making that show.
How long did you shoot?
Kristen Bell she's awesome.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just so enthusiastic. How long did it take to shoot?
Let me think about this. So there were 8 half-hour episodes. I think it took a total of 10 weeks to shoot, maybe a little less. It was shot on a TV schedule. You know, we did each episode took 5 or 6 days, I think.
Yeah.
So Michael, when you're talking about, you know, there is a sort of a thread or a theme that runs through your material, you know, your first, Heather's being your first film. First of all, would that get made today?
No.
Given the sort of the PC culture that we have right now, and you know, the woke culture, you know, it was interesting that was a time where I feel like, you know, a movie like Better Off Dead or Heather is these sort of like really edgy teen comedies that dealt with subjects like suicide, like Somehow I just don't think you could make those today because you'd have to put trigger warnings every 3 minutes or something like that.
Right. You have to remember that you couldn't make those then either. It was not as if there was no bidding war to make Heathers. I promise
Right.
you.
Right.
But the difference is, it's all economics in every aspect of the entertainment business. At that time, home video was growing. It was very nascent, and everybody wanted material to put in the video stores.
Right.
And the people who were financing production wanted to make things that they could sell to the video stores.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a moment where movies like Better Off Dead or Heathers or any number of dark films that were made at the time could get financed and made because people really wanted material. And you could say now, well, everybody wants material now because there's all these streaming services. But all the streaming services and all the venues now are very corporate run, and content is monitored in a different way. And there's so much sensitivity to who might be offended or put off, or how a work might inspire rebellion, violence, God knows what. So there weren't as many strictures then of that kind, and there was this very brief moment in which people were looking for content to put in the new format of the home video format. So we were lucky there, but it was very hard to get anything that dark made. We got lucky because there was an executive at New World Pictures, which financed the movie, who got the script, totally understood the humor, got what we were going for, and he was allowed to greenlight movies at a certain budget level. So he just went ahead and greenlit the film.
So was Heathers a spec that you came on board to, or was it something that you worked with Dan during the time that it was being written, or both?
No, Dan wrote it. He was a friend of mine,
Okay.
an acquaintance and a close friend. We shared a number of close friends. He was part of a group of guys that I hung out with.
Okay.
I'd gone to film school at USC, and he didn't go to the school there, but he knew a lot of the people that were in my class. So I knew him, and our mutual friend Larry Karaszewski, the writer, called me one day and said, Dan wrote this great script, and our agent, Larry and Scott, his partner, had an agent already out of school, and he said, our agent doesn't get the script, doesn't want to represent Dan. Do you think you can show it to your agent? And my agent, who was a woman at William Morris named Bobby Thompson, she's still around, she's great, had excellent taste. And I said, I think she might get this. And so I read the script then and showed it to Bobby, and she said, oh yeah, I'll represent this guy. This is a brilliant script. So I kind of just jumped on board when once Stanley Kubrick passed on it.
I read about that.
Is that real?
That's what Dan wanted more than anything. Of course,
Dan wanted.
Yeah.
Stanley
Not
Kubrick
exactly
to
realistic.
direct a movie. I don't blame him. That would be great.
That's pretty crazy.
So,
So when you read it for the first time, like, did you even know anything about the idea, or were you just like, what is this script?
Oh, I was very much, what is this script? I didn't know. I think Larry said Dan wrote a really funny script that's set in high school, and I said, yeah, I'll take a look. I don't even think that, I remember I didn't even quite fully get it when I read it the first time. I think I read a very long draft. It was 250 pages, and I was scratching my head saying, this is full of all this really funny stuff, but this will never work as a movie. It's too long. It's too out there. But I came around to understanding it better, and I really had a great time working with Dan because he's brilliant. He's amazing.
And Dan, did he also work with you on Hudson Hawk?
He did. I apologize to him weekly for having brought him into that movie, but yes, he had already been doing some stuff for Joel Silver. He did a rewrite on Demolition Man that I think made the movie pretty great. He wrote a draft of Ford Fairlane, so he was peripherally in the Joel Silver universe because Joel was a big fan of Heathers, and Joel and Bruce showed me Hudson Hawk, and I didn't really think the way it was in its original draft was a pretty conventional, fun action adventure movie that was good but didn't interest me that much. I said, I'll do this if I can really turn it upside down. And if I can get Dan Waters involved and we can make something completely, once again, that messes with the tropes and the expectations of the genre.
Mm-hmm.
And Joel and Bruce said, "Oh yeah, that's great, you guys should do that. That'll be really funny." And so Dan came in and revamped the script and turned it into what became the highly unsuccessful.
But it broke even,
sequel.
right?
Oh yeah, it made money. I know it made money because once I was in a meeting at Sony a few years later on a project, and I glibly said, "Well, you guys should make this movie with me because I've lost more money for the Sony Corporation in the film business than any other director." And the executive looked at me and he said, "Don't say that. First of all, you wouldn't be in this room if that were true." Yeah, you're probably right. He said, "We did fine. I think the movie made a lot of money overseas. So it's not that it lost them money. It just didn't make them the kind of money that they wanted. And it was critically, you couldn't write worse reviews if you were trying to write terrible reviews. You couldn't write worse ones than were written about Hudson."
I think before we were talking to you, Lucas and I were talking a little bit about this was an interesting period where Bruce Willis was really sort of exploding as a movie star, and he was doing the Seagram's Golden Wine Coolers. He had his own album where he had a rock persona as Bruno. So there was a lot of other attendant business with Bruce Willis before the movie came out. So there might have been a blurring of the lines between what people felt they wanted from Bruce and the movie itself. I mean, do you look back at it and go, there are things we could have done different, or this was the thing we wanted to do, and for whatever reason it just didn't land right?
Oh no! I mean, there are things that it was what I learned doing that movie. I'd made two very small films where I didn't have complete control, but I had the ability to push through an agenda, a creative agenda that was mine. On Hudson Hawk, I had to deal with Joel Silver, I had to deal with Bruce Willis, I had to deal with the TriStar, I had to deal with all sorts of bigger forces that were far more powerful than I was, and
right.
So it would be wrong to say I got everything I wanted out of it because I didn't. But it would also be wrong for me to kind of slough it off and say, "Oh well, it was ruined by all those other people." No, we were trying to do a lot of what I was trying to do and Dan was trying to do. A lot of what was most criticized when the movie came out. It turned out people didn't want to see that type of a take on that genre at that time with those people. I don't know entirely why, but the stars lined up in a very bad way. And the movie has a cult following now, and you can find reviews that were written 30 years later, 25 years later, that say, "I don't get it. This movie's really creative and it has all sorts of really funny oddball stuff in it." And I would say, if you got me drunk enough, I'd say that a lot of movies that were really successful in the intervening years did exactly what we did and not as well. But and I do think that's true. So I'm perversely proud of the film, but it's absolutely not exactly what I wanted, because when you make a film at that budget level for a big studio, you're going to end up making compromises. That's just
I'm sure you have a lot of really interesting Joel Silver stories that are probably not for mixed company. Lucas and I actually are good friends with Shane Black, who makes a lot of movies with Joel. So we hear a lot of colorful stories about Joel.
I used to go to parties at Dan Waters' house.
Oh, you did? In Hollywood?
Yeah, when I was hanging out with Shane's group, maybe like 20 years ago. Yeah, in Hollywood, you'd have people over, and this is just a silly story, but there was one time we were over there, it might have been like New Year's Eve or something like that. And there was like this almost fight, and it was like these two dudes had been trying to like hit on the same woman, of course. And it came, and our friend Dougie was there. And it came down to this one guy was yelling at the other guy who was horning in on his action. And he goes, Who are you? What's your name? And the guy goes, "Frank." The guy goes, "Yeah, Frank who? Frank what?" The guy goes, "Serpico." And we just everybody, we were off to the side by the pool. We just lost it.
That house was Orson Welles' house.
I remember hearing that. Yeah. Wow. It's a great party house.
It was a great party house. It was the house where Orson Welles died in, I think. And Dan owned it for quite a few years and had a lot of parties, and there were always really funny things going on and funny people there. But you know, he sold it a while ago and doesn't live there
Oh.
anymore and doesn't throw parties anymore.
Okay, so we can mention where it is, but I didn't want to out anybody's address. But you were starting to talk about Kristen Bell,
Yeah.
who's wonderful, and I wanted to give space for that because I thought she was absolutely fantastic, and it spoke a lot to you as a director. I was also thinking about Winona Ryder in Heathers. Was that before or after Beetlejuice?
She had finished shooting Beetlejuice. It hadn't come out yet.
Oh, because yeah, I mean, how do you work with actresses and actors and when it's material that's so tonally unusual and that you're both figuring it out? I mean, that's got to be really difficult. And they must really have to trust and like you.
I think that, you know, I've had my best time working with, well, with actors who are perceptive enough and intelligent enough to understand the various layers of humor, but who also understand that you have to let go of a lot of that stuff once you start performing, because as an actor, you're just basically taking on a character. So in the case of Winona, she was, for a 16-year-old girl, she was remarkably self-aware, and she really understood the humor of the script. And Dan's script was very funny, but it was also very intensely dramatic in its own way. She understood everything that was about. So to work with her, it was easy to, well, what I tried to do was not be too intellectual and not be too analytic in the process of making the movie. But if we ever had to talk on that level, she got it, and she could engage in that way, which I enjoyed. And similarly with Kristen, who is extremely bright, and she's very aware of her own talents, and she's very aware of the storytelling involved in movie making. She's someone that, but she's also an instinctive actress who, once she takes on a role, she inhabits it. So Kristen and I could talk about where the humor was coming from, or why it was funny, or what the character flaws of her character were, in a slightly external, analytic way. But then she would just make it completely internal and do it. So you know, I don't know how my process differs from anybody else's, but I do like to give actors, and I've become more so over the years, I like to give them room to do their work. You know, I don't really believe that my job is to micromanage a performance. You're better off casting somebody who is right for the role and then helping them just shape the performance, rather than casting somebody who really doesn't get it or really isn't the right person and then having to walk them through every beat of a scene or every moment in a movie. So, you know, I will talk with them ahead of time in prep about what the character is and what the story's about and what the tone should be, and we'll work on that in rehearsal. But on the set, I prefer to, you know, obviously it makes a director's life much easier if you can go in and the actor delivers a great performance. You don't have to mess with it too much. But I like to think that I've become more increasingly a hands-off kind of director vis-a-vis performance, and instead set up a situation in which the actor can do their best performance without fear, without feeling vulnerable, and able to do it and be supported in that. Does it make any sense?
Yeah, totally. What was the wine for real? Grape juice?
It was a hibiscus tea of some kind.
What was totally escaped me. It was a
Well,
great.
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind circling around, Michael, to like. Did you always want to be a filmmaker? Was that the thing you wanted to do when you were in high school, or did you come to it through a different route?
I was an arty kind of guy. You know, I drew and painted, and I wanted to be. Actually, it's funny. I've never had much to do with anything in Marvel Comics as a filmmaker, but as a kid, I wanted to be a comic artist. Was my goal. And yeah,
Me too.
Yeah. And so at one point, I went to art school, but I was also very verbal. So I found that art school was just frustrating to me. It wasn't that I didn't like all the people I was in school with; they were great, but the level of discourse was so low. You know, these were people who were entirely visual, and it drove me nuts. So I was always interested in film. I grew up in San Francisco in the '60s. There was a lot of interesting filmmaking going on here and a lot of opportunities to see, world cinema and Hollywood cinema. And so I saw a lot of films. If you had asked me as a 12-year-old if I wanted to be a filmmaker, I probably would have said there was no way I could conceive that I ever could become one. But that, you know, like, sure, I want to write the great American novel, or I want to be the next Picasso, or I want to be, Francis Coppola, or whatever
Right.
it was at the time. So
Right.
yeah, I wanted to. I did make some movies in art school. Then I went back to college. I only spent a semester in art school, and for about
If I could ask you, what were the art school shorts like? What were they, Lynchian? Were they, like, what kind of shorts were they?
I remember one about, and I shot it with my roommate in black and white Super 8, where he was haunted by a cockroach that just kept showing up everywhere. So yeah, they were a little Lynchian, I think.
Right.
I think he ended up eating the cockroach.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so yeah, those movies don't exist anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, that I studied philosophy as an undergraduate and as a graduate for a while. So there was a moment in my life where I thought I might become a philosophy professor.
Hmm.
And, but I went to Germany to do graduate school in philosophy. And when I was in Germany, which was 1978, 78, 79, there was at the same time this great renaissance of German filmmaking. You know, all the vendors and
Yep.
and Fassbinder and these guys were making these phenomenal movies, Schlendorf, whatever. And I was watching them in German. And when I watched them in German, it really actually liberated me, because I realized, first of all, these movies that I loved weren't as great as I thought they were, because I'd been used to reading subtitles. And it's a very different experience to watch a movie and read it at the same time.
Right.
And once I saw it and could understand the original language, it wasn't that I didn't like the movies. I just felt like, well, these are a little more accessible than I thought. These performances are not as great as they appeared to be when you're reading the words. And it somehow emboldened me a little bit to think, well, I maybe could do this. And I left Germany, came back to the States, and immediately applied myself to trying to become a director.
Interesting. Were there certain directors that you wanted to emulate, or that you found yourself sort of drawn to their style, other than the German filmmakers, like American filmmakers or other foreign filmmakers?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, I think probably my favorite filmmakers back then were Kubrick, Polanski, Coppola, Scorsese. As he started to come out with films, it was what everybody liked back then.
Sure.
But I'd
Sure.
also seen a lot of Godard movies, and had seen the French New Wave, and had seen all these German films, and also was really, really heavily influenced by some classic or 1950s style American films. I mean, I liked the screwball comedies and everything that was done in the 30s, but I was a huge fan of Douglas Sirk's films, and I really got a kick out of how he took mundane melodramas and turned them into these kind of really transcendent works of art. I think that
There a little bit of
really
that in The Woman in the House.
there's a little bit of that in
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
What was your favorite era of Marvel comics? When was it, the Silver Surfer era?
Yeah, I was like, hardcore mid 60s Silver Age. I had a huge collection, and I love the Silver Surfer. I love the Doctor Strange from back then. I was very into the artwork of Steranko and Neil Adams and those kind of guys.
Yeah.
And it was, and I had a pretty good, at one point and I also was very heavily into underground comics. So, R. Crumb was the big hero for me. And
That
probably his work influenced me as much as anything in my life.
that documentary, by the way, is amazing. By
Phenomenal.
Terry Zweighoff. Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Marvel films and underground films and foreign cinema. So you found yourself, how did you find yourself working with Coppola, who is a god at the time that I guess when did you start working with him?
So what happened, he lived in San Francisco, and one of my good friends going back to middle school was a babysitter for the Coppolas. So
Wow.
what would have been babysitting, Gio and Roman and Sophia when they were tiny.
Wow.
And another friend of mine was dating this woman who worked for the Coppolas, and he went after high school. He went to the Philippines to work on Apocalypse,
Wow.
and he ended up becoming a great sound designer. And he worked with Walter Murch and the whole group. And
Oh,
but he was there
what's his
during
name?
Jerry Ross is his
Mm.
name. He um, so I had this connection to the Coppola world just through that kind of very vague personal connection. When I came back from Germany, I called Jerry and I said, "Hey, you were in the Philippines with Coppola. I've decided I want to try to become a filmmaker. Is there anybody I can talk to? It's kind of like, what should I do? Is there anybody that you can introduce me to?" So he gave me the names of some people, and I made the rounds in San Francisco, trying to get any kind of job in film that I could get. And the guy who was running the Zoetrope facility down in North Beach uh, talked to me, and he said, "Yeah, I don't know. I guess if a job comes up, we'll let you know." And a job opened up as receptionist. So I just started working answering the phones for the company. Would have been in 1980, and Francis ran such an interesting operation. It was like a family business, and he got to know, he knew everybody who worked in the company. It was a pretty big company at that point. He was very accessible. The filmmaking process was far more accessible to people who worked for the company than it would have been anywhere else. And I
Hmm.
ended up moving to Los Angeles, working for Francis, and so I had a great kind of pre-film school education, just being around all that good filmmaking and all those good filmmakers.
So early tip for aspiring filmmakers, see if you can find somebody who babysits for a great
Uh,
filmmaker. That might be a path to
my,
meeting new
but
people.
it's true. I mean, there's a lot of luck. My dad was a
Sure
doctor in
is.
Martha's Vineyard. He retired, but when like movie stars and directors came in for a physical for insurance, like he had an office. His exam room was full of my artwork, my childhood drawings, and he would talk up his kid. And I used to publish a magazine about film scores. That's why I have those posters behind me. I did CDs of those. I did several hundred CDs. So I know David Newman and most of those composers. And that was what I did in my 20s and 30s. But I had a lot of access because my dad would talk up his kid, and then everybody's nice to a kid. So I would get those entry points to then interview composers, or it's just one thing that leads to another.
Yeah. This is, I mean, the fact is also, in my case, I did have a connection through a babysitter, but I got the lowest level job in the company. So
Hmm.
what I tell people is, yeah, if you have any connections of any kind, whatever it is, if your dad's a doctor and knows these people, if your family has a corner grocery store where they come and shop, whatever it is, fine, use those connections, but be willing to take the lowest level job if
Yep.
that's all that's available to you, because any in is going to help you if you have anything to offer.
Yeah.
And and that's true today. I mean, on sets, there are tons of young people working on the shows that I do, and I talk to them about, well, how did you get this? What did you do? And they're like, well, I just sort of pounded the pavement and asked everybody I knew, and I got this one job working something that was sort of peripherally connected, and that led me to knowing somebody else who went to work on these productions, and they were looking for a production assistant. So I'd stayed in touch with them, and they called me, and that's how it works. Once you're in it, then you can figure out whether there's any place for you.
Yeah, that's the truth about this this business, is that you obviously have to have some talent, but so much of it is like this series of you could say luck or coincidence or whatever it is, and you just don't know where it's going to lead. So that's why you're throwing out as many lines as you can, hoping that one of them is going to finally tug. But
Yeah.
that's, if you ask anybody how they got to where they got, and they back up enough, it's going to wind up being that first domino was just like some weird thing that caused all these other dominoes, and that's how you get to where you get. So you can't be a jerk. You have to be a decent person, and like you said, you have to be willing to be the coffee boy, or start low, and then prove yourself once you're there, and be somebody that people like, and somebody who has some talent. And when finally somebody says, "What do you think, kid?" You got to not try to embarrass yourself and have a halfway decent idea.
Yeah.
It's true. It's always true.
Well,
Yeah.
these we all think about privilege and access and all that sort of thing because there's been a real movement within the mainstream and Hollywood film industry to try to diversify the crews and diversify the director pool and do things that appeal beyond what is now looked at as kind of the boring old patriarchal, kind of material and way of working that had been in place before. And it is interesting because most of the people that were working in film when I started did have some kind of connection through class or privilege or education, but and which I think shouldn't necessarily, it certainly shouldn't have to be the case. It's not fair, and now because people are trying to get away from that, I there are a lot. The crews are getting more diverse. They're getting much more interesting. I think it's much better. You go to the set, and there are people from all sorts of different backgrounds who are working on shows, and they're going up the ladder and becoming directors and writers and getting into positions of greater creative authority. And I think this is a really good thing. I find it very interesting to look at old Hollywood movies now from 30s, 40s, 50s, and you realize how much the world has changed. And I think for the better in terms of diversifying almost everything, because you look at these old Hollywood movies and all the stories are male driven. Even and the women's stories are written by men, and they're like men's point of view about what a woman's experience is, and they're almost entirely white. And I look at this and I go, yeah, that's what I grew up watching all this stuff. It is much more interesting now that you can turn your TV on and see stories that reflect a whole lot more different kinds of experience. I like that. I think that's a good thing.
Let me ask you as a filmmaker. This is a little bit of a controversial area, but we'll see if we can do it. I know a lot of writers who start to feel that they don't have permission anymore to tell certain kinds of stories. Like you just mentioned, a lot of movies about women were written by men. Terms of Endearment, based on a book by a man, written and directed by a man, right? That probably would be harder to do now. Do you feel as a filmmaker that there is kind of like this concern that I can't tell certain kinds of stories where 10, 15 years ago I could have, and I'm more now kind of channeled, like if it's not about a white male, I can't tell it. I can't tell a story about a young Latin girl or a handicapped person or this kind of thing. Like in the old days, Dustin Hoffman could play a character like Rain Man, but nowadays there would be more pressure, obviously, to find an actor that might be, more naturally in that vein, or a person playing a handicapped person like John Boyd in Coming Home. Nowadays, you go out of your way to try to find somebody like that. But do you feel like that is just that's where we are right now? You can't tell every kind of story, and you should leave some of that territory to the, in the old days, something like Dance with the Wolves, which by the way is a Western told from a white, point of view. But nowadays you'd probably want to see a story like that told by a Native American screenwriter or a filmmaker, things like that. It's the price of the game right now. That's just how it's going to work for a little while, or maybe permanently.
Yes, I mean, this obsession with authenticity
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that somehow if you haven't lived that experience somehow or another, if it's not somehow in your genes or related to what your personal experience is, then you're not authentic enough to tell the story from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
To some degree, I think, oh, well, that's really interesting. People are now so sophisticated in how they look at this stuff that even fictional works, they don't want to see them unless they've been written, generated by somebody who has life experience that is in line with what they're writing about.
Right.
You also have to remember that the first thing anybody told anybody who wanted to be a writer, the first thing they were told by anybody with any sense was write what you know.
Right.
So if I had the choice between watching a movie about the Native American experience and I could see something done by a white male or somebody who was raised on a reservation and was part of the culture, I probably think that the one that comes from that culture has got more to tell me. But it
Right.
doesn't mean that the story is better, and it doesn't mean that the storytelling is better. I have no idea. I mean, really good creative people should be able to tell stories that don't just reflect their own point of view. But we also have to understand that whatever stories they
Yeah.
in their
No,
point of view,
that makes
no
sense.
doubt.
It's
So
I just
and
want John Barry to score. I just want John Barry to do the music.
yeah,
there you go.
I think it's also similar to like in comedy or in music, right? If you are a black artist or a rapper, clearly there are things that you can do in your music that you probably should not do if you're like, rapper or something. And the same goes for comedy. There's a really funny Sarah Silverman joke that she tells, which she could never get away with unless she was who she is, and she's Jewish, so it's a joke that comes from her and is extremely funny. But like, I couldn't tell that joke. But I mean, Lucas, you might be able to tell it. I
don't even want to know. I want to talk about television.
It's drop dead funny. But like, again, it makes sense. It's just that kind of thing. But anyway, it's just interesting because I think that's a reality right now of the business. And it looks like it's going to be that way for some time. And while I definitely welcome the diversity, I do also hear the voices of certain, white men in a certain age group who are sort of saying like, I'm all for diversity too, but I got to feed my family. I got to eat. And we just have to be careful, right?
I only have one philosophy: all hacks off the stage.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, to a certain degree, you just got to say, talent should win out, and it probably will. And I'm all in favor of authenticity, but it's also true. So the favorite things I've done, or many of the things I've done that I like the most, have had female lead characters.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a white male, and I say, well, so what gives me the right to pretend that I could tell a woman's story?
Well, your credits.
Right? Pardon me?
Your credits.
In your case, yes, your credits.
Right, but I've questioned this actually, I think in a good way throughout my career, to try to say, well, okay, I don't want to presume that I understand what a woman experiences as a woman. So some of what I'm offering is external. It's analytic. I'm basing it on conversations I've had with people. I'm basing it on life experience. I've been, around women my whole life. But
right.
I used to say, and I still think it's true, and I found this out doing Heathers. When you're casting young people, the pool of talent, female, is so much better and vaster than the pool of talent for males. And I back in the day, I said, what is this? I'm casting this movie with teenagers. I got 2 or 3 deep on all the female characters that, I'm going to pick the one I think is best, but there are lots of good choices here. And on the male characters, I'm lucky if I get one actor who, who feels like they can do it. And at the time I said, well, this is probably because, when you're in high school, there's only a certain type of guy who's going to hang out in the drama department. And, so that the guy who's not going to be playing sports or doing whatever it is men or boys were traditionally doing, they're not going to be interested in theater. So they're not going to develop the skills.
Well, that's why we have so many British and Australian actors now.
Yeah, because it's not valued for young guys to get into.
It is the hardest thing to find in the world, is always the leading man, and especially American. I was watching Stranger Things, and I didn't know who the actor was who was playing Eddie. I was like, I guarantee that guy's English, just because there's something about the accent. But the guy who played the bully, the 5'6" basketball star, which made no sense. I was like, this guy's really good, and his American accent's perfect, but he's from like Arkansas, so good for him.
Yeah. I mean, I think that landscape has changed a bit, but it is interesting, because I also think that in American culture, men are taught to be insensitive. we're raised to be, in many ways, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to not have emotions, all this traditionally. And women are raised to be empathetic and to be, somehow sympathetic to other people. And also, the interaction between women tends to be much more sophisticated on an emotional level and on a social level. So, just falling back on those old cliches, and I don't know how true they are, that gives you a good indication why the actor pool for females might be better than the actor pool for males. But it is interesting, and it is true that other cultures sometimes. I mean, the British also have a different approach to acting, and it's much different working with a British actor than
How so? More technical?
They're more inclined to kind of look at a role and figure out how they can make it work and be interestingly more practical about it. So you don't have to dance around them with all sorts of, actor studio kind of methody things.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, you don't want to give actors a direction that is sort of designed to get a result. You don't give result-oriented direction. You don't say make this funnier, make this more aggressive, whatever. You try to find a way to give them an internal motivation. But with a British actor, if you're really having a hard time getting there, you can say, just speed it up. And they go, fine. With an American actor, you say, just speed it up. They go, oh, what? You mean I'm supposed to be thinking about the pace of the show? I'm trying to play a character. And I hear that and I go, okay, fine. You got to get out of the room real quick because you need to do this. And they go, oh, okay, I can do that. And, it's fine. It's just different ways of talking.
Also because Americans are dumb. You don't have to comment.
That was Lucas who said that, folks. So Michael, let me ask you, in terms of process, when you get a piece of material, do you find that you do frequently have a lot of notes on the material? Are you helping shape the material as you kind of jump into it, or do you find that things are pretty far along by the time you come on board? Obviously it's a case by case, but do you work a lot in hand with the screenwriters or whatever project you're working on to kind of get it closer to your vision, or do they come to you with things that are already in your wheelhouse, so it's like, oh, okay, so Michael Lehmann project?
No, it depends a lot. And since I started doing television, I'd find I get involved in things where I had no say whatsoever in the script. You hire yourself out to direct a television show, you show up and they hand you the script and they go, this is what you're doing.
Right. Okay. All right.
Where was the woman in the house in that process?
That was, I read a treatment. I read a story outline. And I'd worked with Kristen before, so she put me on a list of directors that she liked. And the producers contacted me and said, can you throw together a lookbook and talk about your approach? So I may have read a pilot script, the first script. I can't remember. I might have just read an outline. I know I didn't have any scripts past that. So I read an outline, so I knew what the story was, and it was a good outline. It was well written. And I thought, oh, okay, I really get what this is about. For me, this is how I'm going to do it. And I came in and I said, the way to make this work is to play it perfectly straight, all that kind of thing. And I showed them visual references, stylistic references that indicated the direction I'd like to go in. They hired me. And from that point on, I could have offered the writers any notes along the way. They followed the outline very closely. So there were lots of script discussions. But
okay.
I've worked as a writer, but what that taught me is not to micromanage other writers' work, but to let them do their work. And then if I feel that it's not happening right, or if I can't make it, bring it alive well, then I'm going to talk about it.
Now, you mentioned having to do, or maybe you didn't have to, but you wanted to do a lookbook. Maybe some people out there don't know what a lookbook is, but is that something that you're finding in modern Hollywood you have to do more often to do a lookbook for a project?
I'd never done a lookbook before.
Oh, so this was your first time.
What it was.
Right. Okay.
Oh, it's just something that people pass on the lookbook and then they don't even read the script for scripts, I've found.
Yeah, it
Right.
could be. I was ambivalent about it, but um, my agent said that this is what they want to see. And I knew that this was the way things are going. And so I said, well, okay, I've never done this, but, I was inclined to say, well, they want a lookbook, then they can look at all my work that I've done for the last 40 years. But I
Right.
didn't say that. I
Yeah.
said, no, this is a challenge. Let me see what I can do to define the approach I'm going to take to make this. I didn't see it as a burden. And
Okay.
I don't mind auditioning for something, at this point. There is a part of me that says, well, they got a lot of work to look at if they want to see what I can do.
Right.
But nobody wants to take the time to look at that stuff. And it's also all, it's done, who knows when it was done.
Did you
So,
use your own work or like Fincher for that lookbook?
and so I did do a little bit of Fincher for that lookbook. I did a little bit of uh, Big Little Lies. I did a little bit of uh, yeah, I'm blanking on
Well, I mean, it's beautifully shot. Is it scope? I forget what you ended up doing.
no, it's flat format. But what was great is that I looked at a lot of the female-driven suspense movies that have been made or television shows that have been made recently, and I tried to determine what stylistically really defined the genre. And I kind of knew this from watching these things, so it was not difficult. I just sort of went through stuff and found examples of the kind of lighting, the kind of shots, the sort of lenses, all that sort of thing, the colors, all the visual elements. I looked at them and I said, yeah, this is. They're actually all different. The different filmmakers use different techniques, but it's all within a sort of realm. And I thought, I'm going to make a stew, and I'm going to pick the elements of this stew that I like the most, that I think I can make work together, and it also can be done on the budget we have.
I guess it's lucky
So
that they're still asking filmmakers to do what you were describing, because I think next week they're coming out with an AI that'll do exactly what you just
yeah,
mentioned.
but
Crunch
the
No,
AI is going to do
data.
it even better.
But I'm very
Yeah.
interested
No
for
question.
that project.
Um,
I mean, just the immersion in the decor seemed to be a huge part of the visual look of it, which you guys did great with that house.
Well, we were. The thing is, by the way, one advantage of doing this lookbook is I could show that to my DP and my designer.
Mhm.
I'd already done that work, way early in prep, so I could go to them and say, "This is the sort of thing that we're looking for." John Lindley, who was the DP on the show, is terrific. He's a great DP. He's been around for a long time. He's done some amazing work at a very high level, and I'd worked with him a couple times, and I really like him. And he's very knowledgeable. He's a great guy to work with, but he doesn't deviate from what it is that he thinks should be done. So he has a lot of integrity as a DP.
Mhm.
When the pressure is on to do something in a way that isn't great or isn't right, he will say, no, we'll do it the way you want to do it, and he'll figure out a way to get that done.
So one of the
Um,
advantages then, it sounds like, to doing this lookbook is that you're kind of already in advance prepping a lot of what you need to convey to all the people on board, the crew. And so it's like, here, take it, and everybody can look at it and kind of have a fast pass to figure out what your vision is. And that helps the process, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options. If you're going to point a camera at somebody, there are a lot of options to choose from in terms of how it's lit, what kind of lenses you use, what format you're shooting in, the saturation of the colors. There are lots of visual elements, and you're going to make choices. So if you can show people examples of successful implementation of what you have in mind, and say, we're going to take those elements and do them in this manner, more or less, in our context, then yes, it means everybody's on the same page. You get much better work. It is interesting, Fincher, who is so good and so specific visually, he does tell his people, this is what we're going to do. He knows what he wants, and he's very specific about the use of color, and he's very specific in his framing. Um, and I know this from looking at his movies, and also I was involved at one point on an HBO show that never never saw the light of day, which David was directing and that I directed a couple things of. And I watched him work, and it was really interesting. He works very differently than me, but he has a sense of framing, is a visual sense. It's better than any other director I've ever seen.
Well, he locks the camera to the actor's eyes and their head.
Yeah.
And that's why he does all those takes, because they have to rehearse every single thing to have the camera operator move with it, right?
No, he had an interesting perspective on this. He shoots in a format with a larger room around the picture.
Oh, okay.
Sense. So he shoots what, an 8K or whatever. So there's a lot of room to reposition the camera in post. And he said that he's learned, rather than try to get the camera operator to precisely frame everything just the way he wants at every point of any shot, he makes sure that they're within the realm that he can reposition if he needs to in post. What he doesn't want the operators to do, and this is I think a source of frustration for the operator, is that he says, if you're following an action and then you land, if you don't land perfectly, don't readjust. Just land where you land. I will go in post and readjust the way I want it. And a lot of camera, well, you're the director, you're not the DP, it's not your job. But David is, his visual sense is so good that I would challenge any DP to come up with a better frame.
Yeah, I mean, I love watching anything he does. It's just amazing.
Yeah, but
I forget who told me this, but a friend knows someone who's related to Fincher, and during his formative years, they were telling stories about he would religiously watch like Blade Runner and Alien on a laser disc and over and over and over when he was really young, to just sort of study color and composition and all those things that we're talking about right now, and just until it was drilled into his brain. And that's the kind of stuff that sounds obsessive, but if you want to be David Fincher, that's what you do, right?
Yeah, but that's where his head is, and that's where his talents are. He also has an incredible visual memory, so he knows both what he wants, but he also has a catalog of visual references in his head. He's really special with this stuff.
Yeah, to be at that level with the camera, and so amazing for performance and the storytelling, and to have such a vision. It's like, I mean, of course he's the top. He's just great.
Yeah.
Speaking of film and technology, Michael, I don't know if you've been following the sort of the AI art generators from text prompts controversy, and the fact that an AI artwork just won like a prize at a fair, and it was like a beautiful piece that was generated by by a computer. How do you feel about the sort of evolution of that technology and how it's going to start affecting things like storyboards and concept art and animatics and maybe even making film? It's coming.
I saw the headline about the AI artwork that was won a competition, and I didn't read the article, but it is true that AI should be able to come up with all sorts of great things based on algorithms and whatnot, but that is not what we think of when we think of the creative process, right? So, what do I think of that? I think certainly when you're making things that are very technical, when you're doing work that is shot on a stage, one of those Mandalorian kind of stages where everything is fake, everything is put together, synthesized, that obviously those kind of things are going to be very useful. It's not the way I like to work. I mean, these days, doing special effects are much easier than they used to be. So the funny thing is, if you're not particularly interested in the slow, detailed, tedious work of doing things for effects, the world is now better than it used to be. You can shoot something and have an effects technician on set and say, can we replace that stuff there with something else? And they'll say, yeah, no problem. Or they'll say, there are trees in front of the sky. It might be tricky. Can you reframe this way? But in the old days, it was like, no, that's what you got. You know.
Right.
So there's a whole lot more flexibility now, and you
Right.
do have the ability to do things that you could never do before. But I think it's a little bit like music. You know, you still want to have string players playing in an orchestra, even though synthesizers can make strings sound really pretty good, you know, and
Yeah.
yes, you can have a drum machine do all sorts of great stuff, and maybe that's the sound you want, but it's not the same as a human drummer who, you know, who
Yeah. I
sounds to a different beat.
I do think what's going to be interesting is because AI is getting better so much faster, and if you've seen some of this artwork that's being generated, it's quite amazing. Is that the people who are going to be important are the ones who are able to put in the text prompts, because apparently that has a lot to do with the art that is then generated. And it's, in other words, like it's like me telling an artist, here's what I want, and then the artist does the work, except in this case the artist is computer as opposed to a human being who has to actually do the sort of illustrative work. And because they can now generate within minutes something that looks like it took an artist a week to do or longer, you know, how's that going to displace people who did concept art or storyboards or animatics or special effects or things like, you know, like there's a whole category of the people who used to manually do those things might find themselves displaced. And then there'll be people who just know how to feed the algorithm, as you're mentioning, and will be able to get that material. There'll always obviously still be human artists, but I always felt like that was one area that, like, well, they're coming from all these different professions, but like artists. And but now that I'm seeing like a lot of these artwork, a lot of the artwork that's coming out of these programs, it's a little unsettling. Like, and it is, and it's happening very quickly. Is the other thing. It's like it's learning, it's moving very quickly, like all the science fiction movies that we used to watch. So it's like 5 years from now, you just wonder, like, what's that going to do? How's that going to affect things? Yeah.
Right. It is really interesting. I mean, I think that for me, the pleasure of working is human interaction. Always. It doesn't matter. I mean, but that goes back to, you know, the age I am and the world that I grew up in. I don't want to interact with machines. I want to interact with people. However, if we can go into science fiction for a very brief moment, I'm the guy who, when people say, oh, we should be worried about artificial intelligence taking over, I say, why should we be worried about that? For all I know, artificial intelligence is the natural evolution of biological intelligence. And,
Right.
you know, if the world 200 years from now is a world of machines that are conscious machines that can do things that we were never able to do and can manage the planet fine, humans are no longer even part of the equation. I say, well, what's wrong with that? You know, tell me
they're
where
going to
that's
kill
a
us
problem.
all.
They're going to kill us all. Is that what you said?
You know, I hate to tell you, but we're all going to die.
Yeah.
You know, this is. I've talked to a lot of people about a lot of things, and everybody that gives me a reasonable answer tells me that they're going to die. A lot of people tell me they're going to go to heaven or they're going to have some other life somewhere else, and I'm like, great, that's good. I hope you enjoy that. But the fact is, whatever happens after we die, which we don't know, I don't know, we are all going to die. So it doesn't bother me to think that in some future that the world that we live in, that we enjoy, that we, you know, the air we breathe and the colors we see and all this kind of stuff would now be machines. I mean, what difference does it make if they're conscious and sentient?
Yeah.
Do you guys agree, or am
Yeah,
I crazy?
I don't know. You just reminded me of that Kentucky Fried Movie segment. Remember that one with the family, the death affects is 100%. You know, it's whatever. Bill Bixby, is it Bill Bixby? I can't remember.
Yeah. I think we're all frogs in the boiling pot, except a couple of frogs are turning the temperature up because they make money somehow on the boiling pot.
Yeah.
And the rest of us are just stuck in the pot. Before we
thing
go, Michael,
that-
I wanted to say, I'm watching Michael and I'm like, who is he reminding me of? Who is he reminding me of? Do a lot of people tell you you look a lot like Chuck Schumer? Like a lot?
I don't see
No.
that. You have way better hair.
First
I
person.
see ya.
That's not right.
I see a
That's
huge
totally
Chuck
unfair.
Schumer vibe.
Oh my God. You know, because you look just like Mitch McConnell to me. How about that?
I didn't get that at all.
Thank you.
No, I've never got the Chuck Schumer thing before.
That's
but
funny. Yeah.
Your hair is way better. Well, he's got the transplant, and then
at least he's got hair. What do you think I'm wearing this at?
Yeah. Am I allowed to criticize Chuck Schumer for not being as good as Mitch McConnell at holding his?
I think so. I think you're allowed. Yes.
Well, he got some big stuff done.
The other thing in this conversation, because this does interest me, is I'm going to get nervous when the AI is capable of creating humor that's better than anything a human can do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because visual art, fine, you know, there's a technical element, all that stuff, but humor relies on embracing that which cannot be comprehended in a straightforward way, right? Humor is it lives with the unexpected and it lives with the ironic. And so when an AI can generate that better than human beings, then I'm going to be scared, because I'm going to think that the only creatures that are really going to understand that humor in the long run will be other machines. And the idea of a bunch of machines sitting around laughing is really frightening, because the one thing humans do that is not in any way rational is our response to humor. You know, think about it. We go, we make these weird noises. We get into spasms that are not, they're not like rational behavior. They're these weird, audible, physical responses that basically show that we're incapable of processing what we've just seen or just talked about.
That's a really interesting point, and I wonder if somewhere at MIT right now there is a scientist who's working on a comedy bot, just inputting Henny Youngman, Jack Benny, the Marx Brothers, Woody Allen, Chris Rock, and saying whatever the prompt is, whatever you say, which is like, "How is your day?" It'll crunch billions of jokes.
But I do know that some of the comedians who always just seem like, how did they do it? It seems so improvisational. I'm thinking specifically of Robin Williams. A lot of it was, it's already loaded in there, and they're doing bits. Like Don Rickles, I was like, how does he do this? So, but I watched hours of Rickles, and I was like, oh, I see some of the prompts and the patterns, and he's still hilarious.
And obviously, there's a difference between improv and an act. Like if you see Bill Maher, you see Chris Rock, it's all scripted, but it's designed to look natural, like not scripted. So clearly, they've done the trial and error before they get to that 70-minute comedy performance, and they put it all together. I don't know. That would be a good experiment for somebody to do, but let's hope they don't get it, Michael. Let's hope that doesn't work.
I don't know. But, if you spend time with people who are genuinely deeply funny, you realize, yes, there are algorithms in their heads. There are ways of responding to things that they've developed over time, but they do have a different sense of how things don't fit together than the rest of us. And that's part of their ability to make us laugh. So
my dad was funny once. It was before I was born. He was his birthday came up in 1970 in the lottery as number 1, and he was quoted in the Cornell newspaper. He says, "The first time I've ever won anything." Trip to Vietnam. Then did
he get drafted?
He didn't. No, he was going to medical school, so it was all just a big joke.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's been very generous with your time, and it's been incredibly informative. And I'm sure for the filmmakers out there that watch this little show, it'll be incredibly entertaining. And I'm sorry about the Chuck Schumer comment.
No, it's fine. I'll take it. I'm good with it. I get weird comparisons. Some people used to say to me, "You look like Bill Murray." I go, "I don't look like Bill Murray at all."
What?
I don't see
that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
But are you tall?
No.
Oh, not tall.
I'm 4 foot tall. I'm
4
glad
feet?
Well, a little more than that.
But your son was a college baseball player, right?
He was.
The Jewish college baseball player?
Yeah, he's half Jewish, but he's also a very good comedy writer. Did you know that?
I did know that, because I looked everything up to talk to you.
Yeah.
Very
he's cool. It's funny, and my daughter is a producer,
Wow.
Oh, really?
She was an executive producer on Barbarian, last week's #1 movie.
Oh, fantastic.
Congratulations. That's
Yeah.
great. Very cool. Wow. All right.
And they had no connections in the entertainment business when they started.
I know people say
comedy robot could write that.
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams' dad was a producer. I mean, he's still J.J. Abrams, but it helped to have
work.
it helped. Yeah, but it helped to have Jerry Abrams walk it into executives when the kid was 20 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I say this and people just look at me and go, "Yeah, screw you," because I'll say my kids didn't take advantage of any of Connect, and everybody goes, "No, they grew up around this stuff," which is true. But I never made a phone call on their behalf or anything like that,
Right.
and
Right.
I never would, and they wouldn't want me to. Every once in a while, I'll say to one of my kids, "Oh, did you tell them that that your dad directed them?" And they go, "No." No, are you kidding me? I'm not going to talk about that. I go, "Okay, fine."
Oh, the spines! I got to just say, in the woman in the house, when I looked and saw the bookcase, and every single book she had was The Girl in the Lake or The Girl.
Yeah.
And it's not even, you didn't even, it's just in the background. I paused it. I said, "Look, honey, look at those books." We were dying. Thank you.
It's like the Will Elder gags in Mad Magazine. They're just lurking behind, and it's very,
Yes.
I love that stuff. Yeah.
It's funny because we had all those spines made. We put them on the bookshelf, and then we did the scene, and I realized, how do I get an actor even over to that shelf to be able to shoot it? And this is the kind of stuff that drives you crazy when you block scenes. You say, okay, I'm obligated to get characters in certain parts of a room for storytelling purposes, but it needs to be motivated.
Yeah.
And in that case, there was no better place to put those books. So it wasn't like, oh, we'll just put the book somewhere else. I mean, and I had the actor who was playing the detective. I had Christina walk over to the bookshelf and reference them, and I think the writers even wrote an extra line for her to get over there. And it was really, we were really reaching to make that joke, and I hated that. And however it is in the final cut, we just went very quickly to it because I felt like it's got to be on screen, but we can't be reaching for it. It can't be the whole point.
I'm still laughing thinking about it.
And some prop masters work really hard to do that, so you want to make sure that at least they
and you had the art books too up in her studio.
Yes, that was, the writers on the show they're so funny, and they had a lot of those great details worked out. And the challenge is always then, well, how do you work them in without making them into jokes?
Sure.
The business about this, you can be an artist, even you. How do you be an artist? Whatever those books were. It was, well, how do we get them in the frame and not make the shot be about them?
Right.
Because if it's about them, then you're just making a joke.
Right.
But if you go back to Mad Magazine and they're there, but that's not what the focus is, and it works, and if anybody catches it, then that's good. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, it's almost an hour and a half. Thank you so much for finding the time to talk with us. We're such big fans, and this has really been fun. And we'll be
well, thank you. I have to get back to the Senate chambers to see if I can possibly.
That's what they call a callback, folks.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so it's Lukas Kendall, my friend Charlie Vignola, and our guest MICHAEL Lehmann. Thank you so much for talking with us. And what can we say? Thank you. It was really enjoyable. Okay, bye-bye.
The good news be yours. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, you guys. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Okay.